improving the lives of the world's consumers now and for generations to come. That's not a controversial statement in many countries, and in fact, people in the countries are grateful to be able to rise above what might be tensions about my way versus your way and find a sense of the greater good. So I found fewer cultural differences than I would imagine. Some of them had to do with work styles. For example, when Cemex bought a European company and then was trying to transform it to world standards and the culture and the values, they discovered in Latvia, for example, that people were not as motivated by climbing the career ladder or getting promoted or doing well at work because of the legacy of having been under communist rule. So sometimes how quickly people came on board. But I found that universally people hungered for this, and that the multinationals coming into countries that might be known for, let's say, less than savory practices at the government level were so happy to be working for a company with high standards, and that those companies helped raise standards in the countries in which they operated. So Procter & Gamble was heavily involved in Egypt's first HMO, or insurance scheme, because they wanted to give their employees the same level of benefits in every country of the world, and therefore was going to work with government. IBM helped raise standards for daycare centers in Korea, because they needed to operate to the same standards as the daycare they were offering to their employees in the U.S. So I do have a chapter in Supercorp on diversity and identity, because this is a growing issue as people have to learn to work together coming from different cultures, but they have to learn to understand each other under a framework of community or common values. So the things a Supercorp does very well is, first of all, it allows people to express their individual differences, and that gets valued. So a bank in Brazil that I write about, great example, has a diversity day where they don't categorize people in advance. They allow people to come to work dressed in whatever they think will reflect something important about their identity. And they were expecting they'd get religious garb, or they'd get things reflecting, for example, African Brazilians are a big population. They thought they'd get things representing the home country that the family came from in Africa, but they didn't. They got all kinds of things. Some people it was sports, some people it was music. So they let people opt in, and they also let them form networks of people similar to them across the world. But that might be a professional interest. Then they help people learn the importance of taking the perspective of other people and working together as teams. But the final thing is these values become a unifying framework, because they appeal to people's aspirations and desire for purpose all over the world. If anything, in some of the emerging markets countries, people take it even more seriously because they really care about helping their country.
Professor Kanter, I think all of us are moved by the vision you offer of principled leadership. And you also juxtapose it with the internet, the web, as a place where some of this kind of broad gauge, bottom-up consultation can take place. At the risk of asking a technical question, what did you learn perhaps from IBM and their 140,000 person 3-day web chat? How does this work? Is it some kind of a Wikipedia? The mass governs, the mass organizes itself and takes it. How does this actually happen with huge numbers using the web as the medium of exchange?
So first of all, there will always be room for editors, just as there is always room for leaders. So while we might want to have up to 400,000 leaders in an IBM, or 135,000 in Procter & Gamble, 250,000 in Verizon, or 5 in your small business, or 100 in your law firm to be leaders. By the way, those with 5 or 100 or 200 could be having a weekly conversation about values without having to go to the web. You just sit in one room together and talk about it. That's why I use the IBM story, by the way, because they had to go to great lengths. You don't. All right, so how does it work? I mean, first of all, there were some concerns that people would grouse, complain, We know that life isn't perfect, even in the best organizations. There are daily frustrations. There are things people don't like. There are people who don't like each other. It's not perfect. And they were concerned about, so it's aspiring to be better, but they're not perfect. So some concerns about what people would say, would there be complaints? It became self-policing very quickly because this was such a positive move on the part of the company that people would start shouting each other down virtually. When they complained too much, they'd say, but what are you doing about that? Or I don't want to hear about that. I want to hear about our future going forward. So if you start with some basis in values, you can continue the conversation. You can trust people a little bit more. You can count on the natural leaders to emerge. And then, but of course, all that content, all that input has to be boiled down. So then a team gets assigned responsibility for culling out the common themes. IBM ended up with 3 simple values. One involved dedication to every client's success. By the way, not just their satisfaction, but their success using it. Secondly, innovation that matters for our company and the world. And the third involved respect for individuals and individual responsibility. So 3 very simple statements out of all of that input, but that was done too by a team. So we'll always have to boil it down, find themes. We're not going to live in a free-form, cluttered world. I already feel there's too much clutter. But still, it's a world where those tools of communication are now here. We're not going to put them back in the box. I'm not sure that China will always be able to censor what goes on at every website. I'm not sure. These may be democratizing forces all over the place. I know that a former colleague and student and employee of mine who may or may not want to hear me say he works for Google, but he had done a paper at one point on internet cafes in the Muslim world, and that the people who went to the internet cafes were much more peace-oriented and much more interested in participating in an economy we could all participate in the world rather than having battles country to country. So they were more liberal in their values. So that was interesting too.
Hello. You talk about the Supercorp and the bigger companies that are affecting the community and innovation. What about small and medium-sized companies? What is their impact on the society, and are they doing enough?
Small and medium-sized companies. I have an example of a small company that I talk about at length going through all of the changes and challenges of this century, all the volatility and uncertainty, and then joining a big network. So that's one solution. But one of my favorite examples when I finally get around to talking about leadership is a 60-person real estate development firm that operates this way. They have a very strong set of values and sense of purpose that they want to be the best and enhance the community. Real estate developers, and they want green buildings, and they're constantly looking for innovations in the kinds of amenities or what they can put in their buildings. And they are one of the few developers in Boston to make money during the recession when everybody else in residential or commercial real estate lost money. And so they operate this way. So what you can do as small and mid-sized is you can have a sense of purpose. What's your larger goal? How are you contributing to the greater good? Where do your products and services make a difference? Because they all do. I mean, I'm not talking about tobacco, and I don't want to insult anybody, but that's one I have a little bit of trouble with. But what's your sense of purpose? And that can be part of the conversation, particularly in a smaller company. That can be a screen for the choices you make about who you work with and how you work with them. Secondly, you can be attempting to learn what the highest standards are and see how you can live up to those standards. You can form partner networks to do bigger good work. So Seth Goldman, who is the co-founder of Honest Tea, environmentally sound, healthy tea, they decided as a fairly small company, they're headquartered in Bethesda, Maryland, that why couldn't they be the catalyst for getting a lot of other companies their size and bigger in an area with a lot of government employees So there aren't that many businesses. They got them together and created a Green Bethesda plan.